My name is Loretta Evans, and I'm an accredited genealogist, and we're here at Rootstech. I started doing genealogical research back in the late 1960s when I was in college, and I took a break when my children were tiny, but I've been doing it ever since. So I remember back when you sent letters out and waited for the postman to come to bring your death certificate to you or something like that. So yeah, it's been a lot of changes I've seen. Well, military pension files, these were veterans prior to World War I who were applying to receive some money from the federal government, very often because of health problems that they could prove were related to their war service. Doesn't matter which war. And I think there are some times when people don't look for those things because it doesn't occur to them that they had an ancestor who served in the military. Some of these pensions were granted for Indian skirmishes and things like this, and so there are sometimes people who were on the frontier who, yeah, they didn't go to Cuba in the Spanish-American War, but on the other hand, they did serve the government and they were granted pensions. The veteran would apply if he's still alive, but if he dies in the war, or if he dies not long afterwards but would have qualified, then his widow would apply. And so she has to prove her marriage to him. If he had been married before, she has to prove either the death of the first wife or the divorce. If she'd been married before, then she has to give all those details. If she has any children under 16, and she could qualify to get benefits for them, and so their birth has to be documented and those types of things. When the veteran dies or the widow dies, then there's records that appear in the file that say they're dead, don't pay any more pension files. So there are all kinds of genealogical details that you never know might be in there. Well, I had a pretty amazing one that I discovered in a Revolutionary War pension file. I was looking for Serenus Burnett and his wife Jane Burnside, and those are kind of unusual names. But I knew that Serenus Burnett's father had served in the Revolutionary War. His name was Edmund Burnett. And during the time period in the late 1800s, they didn't have Xerox machines, and so when someone wrote to the Interior Department to get information, they would just send them a letter back saying, this is what the pension file says. And it was very popular in those days for people to join the Daughters of the American Revolution or other kinds of fraternal organizations based on military service or some ancestor who was famous. Well, a man named Charles Judah wrote in saying, I'd like some information about Edmund Burnett, who is my ancestor. Could you please send it to me? And when they got through with the letter, they took his letter and put it in the Revolutionary War file for Edmund Burnett. However, there's a paragraph at the end of the letter saying, I'm also descended from James Burnside, who also served in the Revolutionary War. Can you send me information about him? Well, that was Jane Burnside's father, and that broke open a brick wall for me. And I would never have found it if I'd looked in James Burnside's Revolutionary War file, but I did find it in Edmund Burnett. And just because I was looking for that couple, that's how it happened that I found it. Oh, goodness. Well, the pension files start with the Revolutionary War, and they go right through the Philippine insurrection and the Boxer Rebellion in China right before World War I. And then they changed their policy, and so there are no longer pension files after that. But the most interesting ones I think are the Civil War pension files, because Congress stipulated that they wouldn't pay a pension unless the veteran had some sort of military disability. And so you know more about this veteran's health than you ever wanted to know. And most of them either had chronic diarrhea or other kinds of health problems that they probably picked up a parasite when they were serving or something like that. But there are other details. But because they ask for so many details about the person's health, you get those. Plus, just like today, the federal government loves paperwork. And so there are all kinds of forms over and over they have to fill out. And periodically, Congress would change and update the law. Well, every time there's a change in the law, the veteran fills out a new form because he can qualify for a few more dollars every month. And so you just get more and more stuff. They're more expensive because they take more pages to photocopy. But on the other hand, they're tremendous details. And even if somebody applied and the office says, no, you don't qualify, they still kept the application. Well, I think it depends on how much money you have and how much time you have, obviously. If I had an ancestor who served in the military during this time period before World War I, then I would try to find both his service record and his pension file, if he had a pension. Also, up until just before the Civil War, soldiers might qualify for what was called a bounty land warrant. The government had a lot more land than they had money, and so they'd pay soldiers in land. So he'd get a certificate that would say, you qualify for so many acres of land, but you have to move to this area of the United States in order to get the land. And so you have the service record, the bounty land warrant records, and the pension files, and those are just the beginnings. Because if he was a prisoner of war, or if he was in a hospital, or so many other kinds of military records might be out there. One thing I have found that on Google Books and in other places online, there are a lot of regiment histories that have been scanned. So they say every day during this war, this is what this regiment was doing. And if you know when the soldier joined up and when he was discharged, you can pretty well guess what he was doing or where he was. And those regimental histories are helpful too. So, you know, how much time you have, how much interest you have, how much money you're willing to pay for all these things, you might be able to find a treasure trove of things. And it doesn't have to be your direct ancestor. Maybe he had a brother or an uncle who served in a war, and his brother signed an affidavit in his behalf, so you'll get your ancestor's signature, or it's a paper that he wrote himself. And that's exciting.